Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Dina McFeeters, and I'm honored to serve as First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's Associate Minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all that you are carrying with you today and all that your heart longs to set down. We have a special welcome to the members of the Lakeshore UU Fellowship of Manitowoc who are joining us online today. We're so glad to have you with us. Welcome. And I welcome you to our worship service by inviting you to repeat our mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. These opening words are called Your Broken Heart by Angela Herrera. Don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards, and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy and your passion. Bring your loving and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your powers to heal. There is work to do, and you have all that you need to do it right here. Let's return to our sanctuary for the lighting of our flaming chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
Hello, my name is Reverend Kimberly Tomchek Carlson, and it is my honor to serve as the Minister of Religious Education at the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. The story I have for you today is called A Sick Day for Amos McGee by Philip Stead and illustrated by Aaron Stead. Amos McGee was an early riser. Every morning when the alarm clock clanged, he swung his legs out of bed and swapped his pajamas for a fresh, pressed uniform. He would wind his watch and set a pot of water to boil and say to the sugar bowl, "A spoonful for my oatmeal, please, and 2 for my teacup." Belly full and ready for the workday, he would amble out the door. Every day, Amos waited for the number 5 bus. "Next stop, City Zoo," the bus driver would call. 6 a.m., right on time, he'd reply. Amos had a lot to do at the zoo, but he always made time to visit his good friends. He would play chess with the elephant, who thought and thought before making a move, run races with the tortoise, who never lost, sit quietly with the penguin, who is very shy, lend a handkerchief to the rhinoceros, who always had a runny nose. At sunset, he would read stories to the owl, who was afraid of the dark. One day, Amos woke up with the sniffles and the sneezes and the chills. He swung his achy legs out of bed, curling them back again, and said, "Ooh, I don't think I'll be going to work today." Meanwhile, at the zoo, the animals waited for their friend. The elephant arranged his pawns and polished his castles. The tortoise stretched his legs and limbered up. The penguin sat patiently, all by himself. The rhinoceros worried that his allergies were getting worse. and the owl perched atop a large stack of storybooks, scratching his head with concern. Where is Amos? The animals all wondered. Later that day, hooray! My good friends are here. The elephant prepared a game of chess, and Amos thought and thought before making a move. I'm too tired to run races today, said Amos to the tortoise. Let's play hide and seek instead. The tortoise hid inside his shell. Amos hid beneath his covers. Amos yawned. I could use a nap. So the penguin sat quietly, keeping Amos's feet warm. Achoo! Amos awoke with a sneeze, and the rhinoceros was right there, ready with a handkerchief. I'm beginning to feel much better, thank you, said Amos to all of his friends, and he swung his legs out of bed. Perhaps we will share a spot of tea together. Amos wound his alarm clock. It's getting late, he said, and after all, we have a morning bus to catch. So Amos said good night to the elephant, good night to the tortoise, good night to the penguin, good night to the rhinoceros, and good night to the owl, knowing, though, that Amos was afraid of the dark, was ready to read a story before turning out the light. The end.
Thank you, Kimberly. As we are about to enter into a time of meditation, followed by silence, followed by singing Spirit of Life, I invite you to find a way wherever you are to ground and center yourself. Perhaps you can put your feet on the floor, maybe find a way to lift your spine and allow yourself to breathe deeply and let your hands come to a resting place. If you'd like, you can practice deep breathing during this spoken meditation, inhaling through your nose, giving a long, slow exhale through your mouth. You'll hear how it works along with the words. This is called A Survival Meditation by Nathan C. Walker. Breathing in, I am aware of my pain. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my pain. Breathing in, I am aware of my past. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my past. Breathing in, I am aware of my anger. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my anger. Breathing in, I am aware of my despair. Breathing out, I'm aware that I am not my despair. Breathing in, I am aware of peace. Breathing out, I am aware that I am worthy of peace. Breathing in, I am aware of love. Breathing out, I am aware that I am worthy of love. Breathing in, I am aware of joy. Breathing out, I am aware that I am an agent of joy. Breathing in, I am aware of hope. Breathing out, I am aware that I am an agent of hope. Breathing in, I am aware.
My name is Kevin Gibson, and I'm happy to act as your worship associate today. Now, I'm a pretty nice guy, but I can get angry and I'm capable of holding a grudge. I used to live in Denver and we had a neighborhood bookstore. It served as a low-cost book exchange, community resource, and a general hangout. I love this little bookstore. Eventually I served on the board and later as chair. Our one paid position was a part-time manager, and we'd hired a friend of a friend who initially seemed highly competent. However, word emerged that she was engaged in some practices which appeared to be putting her personal interests above those of the store, and there were some financial irregularities. This was the time that the People's Court television show had become highly popular. For those who don't know the show's format, two disputing parties appear before a TV judge, tell their stories, and typically one side is victorious while the other is not only found guilty but also given a moral lesson. So my course of action at the bookstore seemed clear. The manager didn't respond to a letter I sent, so I arranged for her to be served a summons to small claims court. By that time I was highly invested in the case. To me it was black and white, and we were undoubtedly in the right. The bookstore had a noble purpose, and ripping off well-meaning volunteers in the community could not be tolerated. The way I saw it, there was a clear wrong that needed to be righted, and if the manager got a formal telling off by the judge with all the majesty of the legal institution, so much the better. But things don't often go as planned. In my enthusiasm in filling out the case, I had used my own name, and of course she worked for the bookstore and not me. The judge was tolerant enough to listen patiently to my carefully scripted and rehearsed pleading, and simply explained that as an individual I had no case against her. This happened decades ago. Why has it stuck with me? Substantively, it didn't amount to much. The manager left, the bookstore survived, and is still going strong. Ironically, I can't remember the details of the alleged wrongdoing or even the manager's name. Why then has it stuck in my mind as a traumatic experience? Probably because I trusted the system to see things my way. I'd invested my personal emotions by championing a cause that I thought morally clear and distinct. I felt let down and betrayed by the system, and moreover, I'd let other people down. I subsequently learned about conflict resolution techniques, including mediation. In mediation, an impartial third party encourages each side to look at their interests, broadly defined, to see if there is space for mutual settlement. I became trained as a mediator and mediated cases, so much weightier than my brief foray into small claims court. The evidence is that in judicial cases where there's a winner and a loser, the loser is likely to refute the validity of the outcome, comply with it minimally, and harbor ill feelings. Mediated cases tend to be more fully resolved and longer lasting, but they do require a commitment to at least try to find common ground, act in good faith, and spend time and energy to get there. I was most effective as a mediator when I realized the key issues weren't the dollars involved, but mostly a need to be heard and validated, to have emotional and spiritual dimensions acknowledged, and a level of respect maintained for each party. Just having an impartial person in the room helped people to move the discussion to that level and increase their willingness to let go of entrenched positions. I'm grateful now for the experience of my bookstore spat. It showed me my own failings when fueled by zealous, righteous indignation. I didn't like the moral and emotional drubbing that I got when our case was tossed out, but it taught me some valuable lessons. I now actively work to consider what it might be like on the other side of the dispute. I still get angry sometimes and I may still hold some grudges, but I know them for what they are. In my experience, dealing with conflict alone can be harmful. With the help and guidance of other people, there is hope of getting out of the unhealthy and potentially destructive conflict spiral.
Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see
Mm. Thank you so much for that music. Well, friends, I live in a bubble. A pandemic bubble, yes, but also a liberal religious bubble and a liberal political bubble. My pandemic bubble is small. There's only one person who shares my pandemic bubble on a regular basis. I have a couple of friends I see infrequently, masked and physically distanced. I go to the grocery store only every 2 weeks and maybe the hardware store every few months. I haven't seen my family since last Thanksgiving and don't know when I will. I recently gave up going to the gym due to the sharp increase in COVID-19 cases in Wisconsin. These seem like reasonable sacrifices for me to make to do my part to reduce community spread during this third wave of the pandemic. Perhaps you've made similar choices, perhaps not. I am fortunate that the type of job I have allows me to work from home. I also live in a liberal religious bubble. I grew up in a Unitarian Universalist family, and my extended family is all Unitarian Universalists. The religious diversity in my family consists of differences between atheists and theists, nature mystics and scientists. It's not a big divide. I live in a political bubble too. My entire family is Democrat. During a walk around my neighborhood yesterday, I saw a yard sign that says, "Make lying wrong again." My neighborhood is politically blue for the most part. I haven't always lived in such homogenous environments, but I do now, and it shows in my expectations. I was almost as surprised that Biden did not win a landslide victory this month as I was shocked that McGovern lost when I was in junior high. I know, but junior high. Living in a bubble reinforces your own belief system. Then, when reality breaks in, you're not sure how to relate across difference. You have to decide whether to dig in deeper to your own worldview or try to understand the other side. Historian John Meacham wrote for Time magazine recently, "Division is, in fact, more the rule than the exception in American life. North versus South, industrial versus agrarian, isolationist versus internationalist, religious versus secular. We're a big, complicated, disputatious country, and close elections are common." We are in a transitional time as a country. How will we respond? What sacrifices are we willing to make to heal society? Going forward from November is not going to be easy, but we weren't promised easy, were we? Many of you have more religious and political diversity in your families, schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, and apartment buildings than I do. Some of you also experience race and class diversity in your lives, even in this hyper-segregated city of Milwaukee. I hope and trust this means that you have experience and practice relating across difference and even bridging divides that can help our nation heal, or at least help our faith community learn. First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's end, or goal number one, articulated by our Board of Trustees based on robust input from church members just a few years ago, reads, "We, the people of First Church, build community where we value, develop, and celebrate the gifts that come from authentic connection across difference, emphasizing racial, ethnic, and generational difference." How are we doing on achieving N number one? Or all our N's for that matter. Church members, here comes my shameless plug. Please fill out our annual survey and let us know how you think our congregation is doing. Now, I want to be clear. You don't have to be politically liberal in order to be Unitarian Universalist. Many of us are, but it is not a requirement. We are a faith community committed to practice relating across difference. We need each other moving forward from November. We can't heal alone, nor can we heal the soul of our nation alone. It behooves us to pay attention to where we are starting from. We are starting from a place of deep personal and communal pain. Some of us are estranged from family members across the political divide. Some of us have lost friends over the fight for racial justice. Many of us are demoralized by the lack of national leadership during the pandemic. The racial health disparities made more visible by the pandemic are both shocking and painfully predictable. Many of us are outraged by the actions of the White House administration over the last 4 years that have gone against our deeply held moral values. One might say that our healing journey begins from the place of moral suffering. Buddhist teacher and anthropologist Joan Halifax defines moral suffering in her book, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. She writes, "Moral suffering is the harm we experience in relation to actions that transgress our tenets of basic human goodness. It manifests in at least 4 main forms." As I read her description of the 4 main forms of moral suffering, please listen with yourself and your circles of community in mind and see if any of these forms ring true for you and your communities. She writes, "Moral distress arises when we are aware of a moral problem and we determine a remedy, but are unable to act on it because of internal or external constraints. Moral injury is a psychological wound resulting from witnessing or participating in a morally transgressive act. It's a toxic, festering mix of dread, guilt, and shame. By contrast, moral outrage is an externalized expression of indignation toward others who have violated social norms. A reaction involving both anger and disgust, moral outrage at unethical actions can drive us to take action and demand justice and accountability. Moral apathy occurs when we simply don't care to know, or when we are in denial about situations that cause harm. So do you recognize any of these forms of moral suffering active in your own life or the life of your communities? Those of you who are veterans or active duty military healthcare workers, racial justice activists, those who work in the fields of domestic violence, child abuse, the foster care system, the criminal justice system. The list goes on of the vocations in which we may encounter moral suffering on a regular basis and may also suffer that pain ourselves. Halifax, the author I was quoting from, worked for decades in end-of-life care, consulting with clinicians who confided in her about the moral dilemmas they face when the burden of prolonging a patient's life begin to outweigh its benefits. She wrote, "Some have been required to perform CPR, a painful and often futile procedure, on a patient with only a few days to live. One clinician told her a story about withholding blood products from a patient who needed them because of insufficient supplies in their institution. Many shared that they argue with their teams about what intervention would really serve and were unable to pursue the best path because of hospital policy or patient expectations. Their own principles were not always in alignment with institutional expectations. They suffered from moral remainder, the painful emotional residue that lingers following actions that violate one's sense of integrity." Halifax's book was published in 2018. I can only imagine the kind of moral distress that healthcare workers are experiencing now during our present pandemic. Halifax also tells a story of Hugh Thompson Jr., a helicopter pilot and soldier from Georgia. In South Vietnam, on March 16th, 1968, Thompson flew over a horrendous scene of US soldiers committing violence against civilians in what came to be known as the My Lai massacre. In an incredible display of integrity and courage, Thompson and his two crew members intervened, blocking the American perpetrators. Thompson then escorted a number of civilians to safety. Soon after the incident, Thompson received the Distinguished Flying Cross, which he threw away. The citation praised his heroism in the face of hostile enemy fire, omitting the fact that the hostile fire was from the American side. Thompson was convinced that his commanding officers were trying to buy his silence, yet another ethical violation. In 1969, he testified against the officers who had ordered the massacre, all of whom were either eventually pardoned or acquitted. For years, Thompson was vilified by many in the US military, government, and public for his role in the My Lai investigation and trials. Even though he had acted heroically, his suffering related to the massacre and its subsequent cover-up never left him. Deeply wounded by moral injury, Thompson suffered from PTSD, divorce, severe nightmares, and alcoholism. He was only 62 when he died. Thompson experienced moral distress when he realized he had to defy the orders of his superiors in order to preserve his integrity and to save civilian lives. His moral outrage spurred him to do the right thing, even though he suffered moral injury that haunted him for the rest of his life. Yet toward the end of his life, Thompson was finally recognized as a hero. He and his crew were publicly awarded the Soldier's Medal for their courage in doing what few could have under the circumstances. Thompson returned to My Lai, 10 days after receiving the soldier's medal, 30 years after the massacre. There he met a Vietnamese woman who had survived the massacre. She said she had prayed that the soldiers who had shot at them would return with Thompson so that they could be forgiven. We don't know how this woman, who undoubtedly also suffered moral injury from the trauma of witnessing and surviving the massacre, we don't know how she was able to transform that injury into forgiveness during the intervening 30 years. Not everyone could reach across the divide and do that. I heard an interview that Krista Tippett conducted on November 5th, 2020, called The Long View: Who We Can Become. Tippett interviewed Karen Murphy, who is Director of International Strategy for the educational nonprofit Facing History and Ourselves. She has worked in many countries, including Bosnia, Colombia, Northern Ireland, Rwanda, the United States, and South Africa, and she grew up in Illinois. Murphy creates curricula, trains teachers, and leads global gatherings for Facing History and Ourselves, which partners with over 100,000 teachers in their classrooms around the world. A hallmark of their work is trusting the moral and civic intelligence of the young, with a focus on 11 to 18-year-olds. Her organization believes that facing history and how it lives in us is a healing endeavor and prevention for future violence. Murphy works on something called transitional justice, how to repair societies after violence between opposing sides. She asks questions like, how do we live in peace after years of violence? How do you learn to trust the other? How is confidence restored in communities among people who feel betrayed by their own? Must the violent past be faced in order to secure peace or coexistence or forgiveness? And what role, if any, must there be for acknowledgement, responsibility, blame, punishment, or justice? In Northern Ireland in 2006, Murphy did a 5-day seminar with educators. It was cross-communal. They came from different places, different experiences. It was the first time that together they dug into their history. But first, they started with a case study in the Holocaust and human behavior as a way to learn and create a window and a mirror, and then begin to move out from there into their own history. She asked them as a closing activity to go home and create toolboxes with found objects that represented the tools of transitional justice. They should select objects that have meaning to them. So they all came back with their toolboxes for transitional justice, and they included things like a mirror, because you have to look at yourself in this process, a candle, because you have to have hope, a flashlight so that you can see your way, a book, because you need knowledge, a journal, because you need to reflect, and you also need to write history. And everyone included some kind of adhesive tape, glue, or a sewing kit. And it was because if we do this work we need to do, we will sever our relationship, and that will need mending. They talked about together how much of a relationship is it really if there's no trust? if you don't have a shared past, if you don't have a shared future. And they, like the South Africans, took an affirmative step in the direction of the unknown, in part for their children, because they don't want their children to have the life that they had. In the United States, Murphy teaches about America's long history of lynching. Her organization tries to restore the narrative that Jim Crow was not an aberration, but a huge, long period. Lynching was not an aberration, but a tool of terror against Black people that was used regularly. Murphy said, when we talk about racial violence these days, we treat it as an aberration, but it's not. The unit called Facing the Past, Lynching and American Civic Memory asked this question: how does a history move from one that is national to one that is regional to one that ultimately becomes a burden of memory that rests solely on the victims and a few allies? Murphy uses a collection of photography called Without Sanctuary. It's a book of photographs of lynchings that include postcards. And these postcards are photographs of white people who have paid a photographer to come and take a picture of them standing, smiling next to the body of a Black human being who has been murdered. There are often children in these pictures. Often people are dressed up in their Sunday best. This is part of our history. She said the patterns became clear really quickly. That most of the white people who came to these learning opportunities only knew the myths of lynching, that this is a Southern thing, that it happened in the dark of night, that it was only done by people who wore white sheets. And so this exhibition from our history really demythologized and deeply troubled the way that white people held on to their false view that lynching was aberrant. And most of the participants in these discussions who were Black knew something of this history from a relative or from seeking out African American studies classes or African American history, but the white people didn't. And she said we would end up having really great discussions about how it is that something so public, these were postcards, passed through the US mail. These were events that were advertised in a newspaper. Something so public not only became repressed and became private, but people actually knew somehow not to talk about it anymore. And so you have this gap, she said, where that history doesn't exist in history classes. And if you want to seek it out, you don't look for US history, you look for African American history. So the burden of memory and its legacies and questions of commemoration go to this conversation too, which is, do Jewish people have to be the ones who remind us that the Holocaust matters? Are Black Americans responsible for making sure that slavery, the Middle Passage, and Jim Crow are taught? Facing History works with Helen Fines, a genocide scholar, who talks about the universe of obligation. The universe of obligation. So Murphy said, our young people, take that image, the universe of obligation, and ask, to whom am I obligated? To whom do I owe amends? Brittany Cooper, author of Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower, wrote about Kamala Harris's ascension to the vice presidency for Time magazine. Cooper wrote, "When Americans elected Kamala Harris vice president, they symbolically completed a 150-year project of recognizing the right of Black people to exercise the full franchise as citizens. Still, white liberals sometimes make the mistake of thinking symbolic gestures, like adding a Black woman to the ticket, will be enough. Many white liberals have already begun to speak in the language of healing and unifying the nation, even as our wounds are still fresh. Trump's entire term," she continues, "has been marked by sexism and racism. Yet more than 70 million Americans voted for him. The threat of injury from angry Trump voters remains. These Americans have no interest in being unified with a white man who would give a Black woman a shot at breaking the glass ceiling. And as a Black woman who is horrified at the overwhelming levels of support that Trump received, I have no interest in any leadership that tells me I should want to be unified with people who think as the other side does. One Black woman," she wrote, "is not a sufficient salve for the festering wounds of American racism and sexism. Simply diversifying the country's leadership without prioritizing the well-being of the people who elected him would make Harris an empty symbol. Her presence begins rather than ends a conversation about what America owes Black women. What other Black women in leadership deserve is a range of seats at the table throughout the Biden administration. And what everyday Black women, the Democratic Party's most committed voting bloc who made this victory possible, what everyday Black women deserve is increased hope, an end to COVID-19, economic opportunity, affordable healthcare, and reproductive access, and safe communities in which to live and raise their children. We don't want commemorative plaques. We want comprehensive policy." Brittany Cooper said, "Our wounds are still fresh." Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, said, "Truth comes before reconciliation." I think these two statements are related. Our wounds are still fresh. Truth comes before reconciliation. I believe that we need to tell the truth about our wounds before they can heal. The truth I know about our country is that the abuser has not yet left the house, nor is there a restraining order. Like trauma victims, we are still afraid. We must face our country's history of violence and speak those truths while we confront present-day violence and create a new future. If you have been harmed by the cruel policies and rhetoric of the last 4 years, or by the entrenched systems of oppression in our country, take care of your suffering. Attend to your own soul repair. I don't expect you to reach across the divides while your wounds are fresh. Healing takes time. Healing is possible, but we cannot do it alone or quickly. It takes time and intentional effort. What truths do we need to tell across the divides? And how will we do that without inflicting more moral suffering? I don't have the answers, but together we may find them.
Abraham Lincoln looked down from heaven on a house divided 77. 77. Here he saw cunning, their castigation, baubles to bind up wounds of a nation. Wounds of a nation. Where dwell our better angels? Angels with malice toward none. So many lay down in the cold ground that we'd all be one. One. Abraham Lincoln thought of those giving their last full measure for us the living. For us the living. How will their children achieve and cherish so that this truth from the earth shall not perish? Earth shall not perish. Where dwell our better angels? Angels with malice toward none. So many lay down in the cold ground that we'd all be one. One. Where dwell our better angels? Angels with malice toward none. So many lay down in the cold ground that we'd all be one. We might all be one. We could all be one. One.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your generosity. Pledges are the core of our church's spiritual practice of generosity. We're also grateful for those of you who are giving to support our online ministry. Others of you can support us by texting 73256 with the message "Give to you," or you can give on our website. Your gifts help us to continue to provide this ministry. We also share the plate with an organization each month. In November, our Share the Plate recipient is Zao Milwaukee Church. Since 2016, Zao Milwaukee has been serving as a Jesus-rooted, justice-centered, and radically inclusive church of diverse folks, explicitly affirming the life, value, and worth of LGBTIA people and the movement for Black lives. You can go to their website and give with a note, Share the Plate from First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. You can see all those options on your screen, and they will also live on in the YouTube comment section of this video after worship is over. Thank you so much for giving right now or when you come back later. Your support keeps us and our community partners going. Thank you. These closing words are a poem called Frederick Douglass, written by Robert Hayden. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally one, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo jumbo of politicians. This man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien. This man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.